Hello and welcome back to the Frequency of Becoming, and this is episode 4. And in this episode we're going to look at how our nervous system absolutely loves the familiar. And before we begin talking about this, I want you to, as we've done in every other episode, just check in with yourself and just ask yourself the question, who am I being right now? What state am I being? Just notice what's there without judgment. Just allow yourself to really notice without changing anything. And in the last video, we talked about all the different things that affect the way that we wake up in the morning, the state that we wake up in. And we talked about how our body, our hormones, our environment, the quality of sleep, the conversations we had the day before, what's been happening, all those things contribute to the overall state that we wake up in the morning. And I likened that to a mixing desk with all the different levers on there, and wherever they're placed it creates an overall state in which we wake up in. But there is a really important piece to this, because if we understand that we can change our state, and I've had people ask me this in client sessions, and I've experienced this myself also, why is it sometimes so bloody difficult to do so? So we're going to go into this today, because we can consciously decide, okay, I'm going to think differently. I'm going to behave differently. I'm going to stop doing this behaviour. I'm going to become more confident. I'm going to be the person that doesn't react as they normally did. I'm going to respond instead. But then suddenly, in certain situations, we find ourselves, even with all the knowledge, just doing exactly what we used to do. Exactly the same thing, just responding exactly as we always did. And that can be quite frustrating at times. And I want to explain why and also what to do about that. So it feels like in those situations that we're just being pulled back in. It's like a tide that just pulls us into that old behaviour. And that's not really wrong. It actually is that. And that is because the nervous system has a really strong preference for going back to what is familiar. It goes back to similar experiences, and then it comes back with the similar response. So once we understand this, the changing ourselves becomes a slightly different process. So we're just going to explore that a little bit more deeply in this episode. So if you're ready, let's explore what's happening here. Let's begin. So let's just start by imagining that our brain and our nervous system are constantly and consistently trying to answer one fundamental question. And that question is, what do I already know about this? So your nervous system is designed to help you navigate the world. It's designed to keep you safe, and it's constantly scanning your internal and your external environment, looking for patterns. What's safe, what's familiar, what's predictable, what have I experienced before that's similar? How did I respond last time? And all of this information is incredibly useful, because if you imagine every single thing that you've experienced had to be processed as a completely new set of information, you'd be exhausted all of the time. You wouldn't need a nervous system. You would need a kind of full-time research department behind you and every decision that you made. So instead, your brain is constantly creating shortcuts. So it learns patterns, repetition. And then it uses those patterns to predict what's likely to happen next. All of that makes complete sense. Now, the problem with this is that the familiar doesn't always mean good. And here's the really important part of this. Your nervous system doesn't necessarily prefer what's good for you. It prefers what it knows. And there's a huge difference here. Something can be uncomfortable, unhealthy, unfulfilling, or just completely outdated for the version of you that you are now, and your nervous system just still recognises it as familiar. If you think about addiction or anything that we do that we know isn't good for us, but we just keep going back to that, it's just familiar, and that familiarity just feels safe. very strangely safe. It's in our comfort zone. And when you consciously know, so it's in your conscious awareness, I don't want this anymore, this behaviour, this job, this person, this thing, whatever it is, we just realise I don't want this anymore. But it is exactly because of what I've just talked about, the familiar, which is why we find ourselves in the same kinds of relationships, the same kind of emotional patterns, the same reactions, the same self-sabotaging behaviours, the same thoughts, the same habits, and the same stories about ourselves that we talk to ourselves in the way that we talk to ourselves. And then we get frustrated and annoyed and, why do I keep doing this? And it's because on some level, your system knows that this is the well-worn path. This is the familiar. So just imagine for a moment, just walking through a field, and there's a beautiful open field in front of you, and there are two possible routes. One is a completely new path that you've not been along before, and the grass is longer. You don't really know where it goes. You can't see where it goes. It's unfamiliar. And the other path is an old path, and you've walked it hundreds of times. It's completely worn down, so the grass is shorter. It's very well trodden. You don't have to think about where you're putting your feet, and your body just knows that route automatically. And if you just imagine yourself in that situation, just feel which one you'd be drawn to, which one are you naturally going to take? And of course, it's going to be the old path because it's easier, isn't it? And it's not because it's necessarily the best path. It's just because it's the familiar path. You know where it goes. You've been on it loads of times. You know the route. You know what's on the route. And this is what's happening inside of us every time we think a thought, or we feel an emotion, or we react in a particular way, or we activate a particular pattern. We just strengthen that pathway. We're regrooving that pathway. We're walking that route again and again and again and again. And it just becomes more and more familiar. So it's easier and easier to go there again. So this is why change can feel strange sometimes. And I want you to just imagine now that you've been a person that spends years worrying. And I work with lots of people like this. And then suddenly you decide, right, okay, I'm going to start trusting myself now. I'm not going to worry so much. And your conscious mind says, right, brilliant, let's do it. It feels really empowering. But then the other part of your system might go, hang on a minute, because trust isn't familiar. It's not familiar to us. Trusting ourselves just isn't familiar to us as a being, but worry is. Or perhaps you've been somebody who's spent years putting everybody else's needs before your own, and now you decide, okay, it's time for me to have boundaries. It's not healthy for me. It's not serving me, and it's not helping them actually. And again, this is something I work with a lot with my clients. So your conscious mind says, okay, this is a great choice. This is healthy for me. This is good. But your body might feel uncomfortable with that. And there might be emotions that come up that make you feel, I feel a bit guilty about putting myself first here, putting this boundary in place with that person that takes. It might feel a bit selfish, and it might make you feel anxious because it's unfamiliar. And that might make you come to the conclusion that maybe putting this boundary in place isn't the right thing to do because it feels a bit uncomfortable. But perhaps that boundary is exactly what needs to happen. It's perfectly healthy. And perhaps what's uncomfortable is simply that it's the new thing. It's not the actual thing that you're going to do is putting the boundary in place. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just that the thing you're doing is different to what you've normally done. And that's the thing that's uncomfortable. It's simply that it's a new choice. So that's a really important distinction I want you to make, and I want you to think about. The discomfort doesn't always mean something's wrong. Sometimes it just means this is just unfamiliar to me and what I've always done. Now, the body is generally a step behind the mind. And this brings us back to something that I've talked about with my clients many, many times, and myself. You can consciously know something without your body fully believing it yet. You can say to yourself, I'm safe, but your body might still be preparing for danger, the next thing to go wrong. You can say things to yourself like, I am worthy, and you can believe it in that moment, but your body might still contract when somebody says, you're looking great today. Oh, well done with that. You've done really well. You can say, I trust myself, but your nervous system, your body, might still need the reassurance. You can say, yeah, I'm ready and excited for something new in my life. And yet you can still find yourself procrastinating, avoiding, overthinking it, and going back to the old behaviour because it's familiar. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're sabotaging yourself. It just may simply mean that your conscious intention has moved ahead of your body and your nervous system's learnt expectations. And this is where we need to just stop fighting ourselves. We just need to bring this to our conscious awareness. So the next step is to stop fighting the old you. Because one of the things that we can do when we're trying to change is to become incredibly frustrated with ourselves, as I've mentioned. And I know that I've been here myself. Why am I still doing this? I should be over this by now. I know better. Oh, for God's sake, what's wrong with me? And ironically, that can create another familiar state because you've done that many times as well. The self-criticism, the frustration, the shame, and the sense of failure. I've failed again. Oh my God, like this is so annoying. So now we're trying to create a new version of ourselves while simultaneously reinforcing the old emotional pattern that we've had before. So instead of that, what I'd like you to do, and what I teach my clients to do, is to become curious. So when you notice these old patterns kick in, I want you to just pause and stop and say, there it is again. That's the old pathway. That's my familiar response. And that overrides the immediate thing, there's something wrong with me. What's wrong with me? But it's saying, you're kind of asking the question, what is my nervous system expecting right now? And that's a completely different question to ask when these old responses kick in. So the old program, I sometimes describe to clients and talk about their old program that's been running in the background. This old program perhaps learnt very early that there's many of these beliefs. So there's just a few examples. Maybe it's learnt that I have to be perfect to be loved, or I have to look after everybody else, or it's safer not to be seen, or money isn't safe. Money means I'm greedy, or people can't be trusted, or I have to do everything myself for it to be done properly. And these beliefs don't just live as sentences in your mind, they can become deeply associated with emotions, bodily sensations, behaviours, and expectations. So they become part of your internal operating system, just like we have an operating system on our computer. It works in exactly the same way. And because this system's been running for a long time, it feels like you. And this is the really important thing. A pattern can feel exactly like you without actually being who you are. It is just something that you've learned. And as you know, we can learn new things. So what's been learnt can be relearned. So the new path, if you go back to the analogy of the two paths in the field, every time you choose the new response, you're putting one foot onto that new path. And it's just a tiny step. Maybe you only manage it for 10 seconds. Maybe you notice yourself about to react in the old way and then you just pause. maybe instead of saying yes automatically, you might say, okay, let me think about that. Maybe instead of reaching for your phone when you feel uncomfortable, maybe you just sit with yourself for a moment. Maybe instead of criticizing yourself, you speak to yourself with compassion. Maybe instead of automatically catastrophizing what might go wrong, you just take a breath and you might ask, okay, but what else could be true? And these moments in the now moment are the things that are incredibly powerful. These moments really matter, because what you're doing in every single one of those moments that you choose a new response is you're giving your nervous system and your body new information. And the new information is that this is possible too. So we don't have to destroy the old path. And I think this is where a lot of personal development gets it slightly wrong. We don't need to abandon it and completely destroy it. We don't necessarily need to destroy the old version of ourselves that had these old patterns. We definitely don't need to fight it, and we don't need to shame it. And we don't need to pretend that it never existed. Because that old pattern definitely developed for a reason. Because at some point, it helped you, it protected you, it helped you to feel like you belonged, it helped you cope, and it helped you to navigate something that you didn't yet have the resources to navigate differently. So instead of saying, I need to get rid of this part of myself and being angry with it, we can say, thank you, I understand why you learned this. And then you can say, but we have more choices now, we have more information now. And this is where the real transformation begins. So coming back to frequency, and this is where that comes in, the bigger idea behind the series and the reason why I'm doing them is, if your body, your nervous system, your emotions and thoughts have become really accustomed to a particular state, that state then becomes familiar, and it's the easiest state to return to. It's like a well-worn pair of shoes. It's like a well-established energetic groove in your brain. And when you begin practicing a new state, at first it'll feel a bit unfamiliar and it might feel slightly uncomfortable. But the more that you experience it, the more that you practice it, the more your system begins to start to recognize it. Oh, we do this now and we know this now. And eventually, the new path starts to become familiar too. And this is the process of becoming, and this is the process of healing and shifting past those old limiting beliefs and old patterns that we've had running for a long time. So it's not forcing yourself to become somebody completely different overnight, but it's just gently giving your system repeated experiences of the person that you're becoming. You're teaching your system, you're teaching your body. No, this is how we're now starting to operate. So this leads us beautifully onto the next part of this series, because you might now be thinking, okay, Helen, I understand that my nervous system likes the familiar, but what if I know exactly who I want to become? And what if I think positive thoughts every morning? What if I visualize my dream life? Why doesn't that automatically change everything? And that's where we're going to go next, because there's a really important distinction between thinking about a new reality and actually teaching your body and your nervous system that this new reality is safe and familiar. And that's why all of the positive affirmations and the positive thinking bandwagon alone isn't enough. And believe me, I've done this for so long that I've tried everything. And that's exactly what we're going to explore in the next episode. So for now, if you find yourself falling back into an old pattern this week, instead of judging yourself, just pause and notice, and just perhaps simply say, this is that familiar pattern. And then ask yourself, what would be a tiny, slightly different response I could do here? Because you've got that tiny gap of space to respond differently. You don't have to leap on that new path and go running along it. You just take one step and then another step and then another. because every time you practice a new way of being, you're teaching your system this is also possible. This is possible too. And eventually, what was once familiar, what was once unfamiliar for you, and this new way of being becomes familiar. And then what becomes familiar becomes easier to choose. And that's the beginning of becoming the new version of you. So I would absolutely love to hear your comments, love to hear your journeys, to know where you're from. And if you're enjoying this series, and if you'd like me to do any other videos, just be great to connect. And for now, I'd like to thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next one.